And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Scarlet Fu, taking you through to that closing bell with the global simulcast. Massar, Tim Stenovec join us from the radio booth as we welcome our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, including our partnership with YouTube. On a record day and a record week, Massar, despite all the volatility in between.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of volatility. We're coming off our best levels of the session. We caught up with Rob Kaplan, former president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, now vice chairman over at Goldman. We talked about pressure on the Fed. We talked about next week's Fed meeting. He says he's not ready to conclude that it's time to act in July, which is pretty much what everybody's thinking. But he said maybe, potentially, it would be right to see a Fed move come September.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in August and what we hear from Jackson Hole. Certainly next week, the Fed on our radar. But what about Meta platforms? What about Apple? What about Amazon? What about Microsoft? They are all reporting next week as well.
And everyone's going to be looking at how much they commit to CapEx. Alphabet committed more, so there are some question marks about whether that's going to be good or bad. Is anyone paying attention to Michael Hartnett's warning about a potential bubble risk in equities? It feels like people are looking at that and saying, nah, not right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about the meme stock mania, which has calmed down a little bit over the last couple of sessions, but still, you're seeing some pretty healthy gains out of a lot of companies that, let's just say, to be diplomatic about it, don't necessarily have the fundamentals to back it up.
I keep thinking about Gina Martin Adams earlier in the week, Tim and I talking about her. These small moves that we're seeing, that maybe that could be a sign of some consolidation at higher levels for stocks. But time will certainly tell as we get through earnings, Romaine.
All right. Well, at least for the day and, well, for the week as well, it is a pretty bright day. 340 stocks roughly in the S&P are higher on the day, and that's enough to take it to another record high, closing just below that 6,400 level, up more than 25 points or about 0.4% on the day. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closing out the day higher by about a 0.5 percentage point, and that's going to be good enough for a gain on the week of about 1.3%. The NASDAQ 100 and the NASDAQ Composite each rising about 0.25% on the day, 1% on the week, and the Russell 2000 participating as well, 0.4% on the day, and on a weekly basis, Carol, it's going to close out higher by about 0.9%.
All right, back to the S&P 500 I go, guys. And we had some fairly broad-based buying today. Scarlet, 332 names in the S&P 500 to the upside, 167 losing ground for unchanged, at least as we settle in here.
All right, and let's take a look at what's leading the gains today. It's really a mix of cyclicals and, of course, big tech. You have materials and industrials, each gaining about 1%. Consumer discretionary up about 0.8%. And then on the flip side, energy lower by 0.4%. Communication services moderately lower.
All right, let me get to some of the individual gainers, if I may. And I feel like these are perhaps all things in Romaine's life, but we'll have to see if that's true. Let's start with Deckers, because that is your number one gainer in the S&P 500. I definitely see some Uggs and some Hokas in his closet. Stock was up as much as 20% intraday, finishing the day with a gain of about 11%. But as I said, number one gainer in the S&P. Net sales for Ugg and Hoka surpassing analyst estimates in the fiscal first quarter. Ugg sales rising about 19%. Hoka sales increasing roughly 20%. Bloomberg Intelligence, our own analyst, saying that Ugg's momentum further validates their conviction about the brand's health, and Hoka outperform expectations as new product upgrades fuel demand. All right, also check out Romaine's home. You might find a Yeti or two in there. We have that stock up about 5.6% here at the close after a Betaville uncooked alert says the outdoor products maker may have attracted some takeover interest. You might remember back in May that the stock rose after Jefferies said that the consumer products company stands out as an attractive target for private equity. The report, though, in today's trade, citing people following the situation, identity of a potential buyer is unclear, though some of the people suggest a PE firm may be interested, so maybe a private equity play. And then
Wouldn't it be great if, like, Deckers just bought them? You carry around.
What are the synergies?
Your big, gigantic mug with your
hydration.
Actually, I think people who wear Uggs probably carry Yetis. Can I make that assumption?
No, they carry like Stanley Cups, right?
All right. One more thing that might be in Romaine's driveway, a Tesla. Probably not. I'm thinking you're not a Tesla guy.
Who has a driveway?
Are you a Tesla guy?
Well, first of all, yeah, I live in Manhattan, so no, I don't have a driveway.
If you have a driveway, then I'm going with you to the Hamptons.
Yeah.
If you got a driveway.
You need a driveway for a Tesla or garage because you need to charge it.
And who drives in the city? Come on.
All right, we all drive in the city. I drive in the city. All right, all right. So Tesla was a top gainer. Number two gainer in the NASDAQ 100. Stock up about 3.5%. We know it was sold off yesterday following Tesla's report that came late Wednesday and Elon's warnings. Analysts, though, raising price targets for Tesla. since it reported earnings. 8 changed price targets. The average change was up about 3%. 5 raised price targets by an average of almost 9%.
Wow.
3 cut their price targets by an average of 7%.
Wow.
And 4 analysts downgraded
Wow.
their investment recommendation. None
All right,
upgraded.
Tim. I hope yours are better.
Hey,
I actually got the 2 worst performers
Came
on a
up with a
percentage
theme for you.
basis in the S&P
Wow.
500. Let's start with Intel. Shares down 8.5%. You guys know what happened yesterday after the bell. Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan sparked concerns that he's more focused on cost cutting than restoring the chip maker's technological edge. Check out what he said on the call. Quote, "I do not subscribe to the belief that if you build it, they will come." He was referring to future spending and the spending under his predecessor just over the last couple of years in building these facilities, some of which they stopped building and they slowed down construction.
I am curious, though. I know everyone's taking that as a negative, but is that potentially maybe a positive? I know there's been so much talk about how all these other companies are just spending all this money willy-nilly and not really seeing a return from it. Maybe a more pragmatic approach
I feel
helps?
like Ian King said you got to spend, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, think about this. This is Intel. This was like the king of chip making back in the day.
Yeah.
It's a cyclical business, but Intel has completely missed out on this cycle. I mean, yesterday, this was before the earnings. This was a $100 billion company. It's now about a $90 billion company. The question is, what does it look like in its next iteration, and how does it compete with the big players out there?
I mean, the
now?
Bears would say that comment sounds like he's managing for a decline or through a decline rather
Yeah.
than managing for a recovery, right? Or for growth.
I mean, that's what and that's why I think you saw the reaction today. So we'll have to wait and see. Remember, he's still a new CEO, so he's got some time for a turnaround. But we've been saying that
Does
about the
he?
last 2
Yeah,
CEOs as well.
exactly.
I think it's fair to say. Hey, also Charter Communications, this was the worst performer in the S&P 500 today. It had its worst single day ever, down 18.5%. This after the company said it lost 111,000 residential high-speed internet customers in the quarter that ended at the end of June. It was more than analysts had predicted. They're facing pressure from the rise of 5G from mobile companies and also fiber home internet offerings as well. And finally, taking a look at Pinnacle Financial Partners, down 12%, along with Synovus, down 12.5%. This after the companies agreed to an all-stock transaction valued at $8.6 billion. It'll combine these 2 banks in the U.S. southeastern market, but investors not liking the looks of this, at least today.
All right, let's take a quick look at yields. We did actually see some movement there, relatively modest movement to be sure, but to the downside, basically about a 1 basis point across the board here. And it gets to this idea of a little bit of stasis right now going on in the yield spaces. Everyone really tries to game out, guys, where we go next with rates, particularly in light of all the pressure from the White House on Jay Powell, which we all were here live on air yesterday.
Sometimes
Watch
with hard
it.
hats, sometimes without.
Well, the hard hats just was like, I mean, chef's kiss. I mean, honestly.
How-
It's the best television we've had in years.
That moment in time
Yeah.
is just like seared
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
memory forever.
Do you think it would have been as funny if they weren't wearing the hard hats?
No.
No,
Exactly.
it was only compelling because of hard hats.
No, the paper made it. The paper
Oh, the
was what
paper.
made it compelling
I
to
love
me.
it. Has anyone seen that paper? Is that going to be
No.
like in the presidential library like years from now?
In the Smithsonian.
And was anything on it? Was it like the grocery list?
Yeah,
It was
I mean,
like, you know, bread,
Powell
milk,
referred to it. He said the
you know.
reason the cost has
Vermouth.
gone up, in your view, to more than $3 billion is because of the additional building that, construction finished, he said, 5 years ago on this, that he was now including in this assessment.
Yeah, and he was talking about basements and garages and things that, I don't know. I mean, I know he's a real estate developer, but,
It's too bad SNL is not on right now because I feel like they would have had a field day with this.
I mean, I feel like we're post SNL at this point.
I-
This can't even be lampooned, right? I mean, it's like reality is now
No, it's
the comedy.
perfection
Yeah.
already. Like nothing even needs to be done.
In our world, I mean, we follow the Fed chair very closely. We follow Fed speakers very closely. But to me, yesterday, and talking, I went out to dinner with friends last night, and they were talking about this. And these are people who don't live in this world. They saw this. This was something that
Yeah.
entered
showed
the
up in their
mainstream
feed.
conversation.
Yeah, I am curious about that. I had several people message me who aren't at all interested in finance in
Yeah.
any good way that showed me this video. They're like, oh, have you seen this? And I was like, yeah, I lived it. But it gets to the question, do we want that? I mean, like, at what point does it become
The president
where
wants
it's just
that.
too much? And it's just, and it hurts the independence of the Fed. And more importantly, it hurts the ability for them to do their job and do it in a way that's responsible without public pressure.
And I will say Rob Kaplan, former Dallas Fed president, said that basically what's going on inside the Fed is the message of like, put your heads down. Let's focus on the fundamentals and let's think about what's the right monetary policy. That's probably what's going on.
Until you're let go or forced out.
He didn't think so. You asked him.
Yeah, he said he would not think that the Fed chair will leave before his term is up in May 2026, but remains to be seen whether he'd stay on the board of governors until January 2028.
You know what would be great TV if you and Carol did your show in hard hats.
You got to make sure the hard hat fits properly.
I have been on
Jay Powell's
air.
hard hat was too big.
I have been on air in a hard hat. I've driven a Caterpillar
Oh, really?
tractor and
Okay, I will look that up during
I've
the
done
commercial.
photographic proof of this.
I'm going to look that up during the commercial break.